It's just a huge honor for me today to be podcast interviewing Ophir Tanz, is an award-winning entrepreneur and technologist. He is the founder and CEO of Pearl, an artificial intelligence company focused on solving fundamental and challenging problems in the dental industry. Previously, Ophir founded and led GumGum, a company focused on applying AI and computer vision to the media category, which he grew to several hundred million in revenue globally. Ophir received his bachelor's and master's from Carnegie Mellon University. He's an active member of the Los Angeles startup community. Ophir actively advises and invests in startups, has been featured on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine, and has been the recipient of multiple business and entrepreneurship awards. Now, when I read your bio, I expected all that because you're the son of a dentist.
That's right.
You were already born on third base. So was your dad, Josh, being a dentist, obviously connected to your first company being called GumGum?
I don't think so.
You ruined the story.
Maybe it was subconscious.
That just ruined the whole story. Just make something up.
I mean, look, I think the father-son relationship and dynamic is an important one. So maybe that's been controlling all the decisions. But yeah, my dad was a dentist. I grew up very much in the dental office. I used to watch him sort of work on and operate with patients when they would allow it for hours on end. I was always very fascinated by it. I'd also like to say before we get into it, first, thanks for having me on. But also owe you a thank you because I've been listening to your podcast increasingly as a non-native to the industry, and I've been learning a lot. So it's a great resource.
Thanks, man. And tell your dad congratulations on his son. And that's so he's retired. He doesn't do it anymore, right?
Yeah, he's retired now, but he practiced for I think almost 40 years. And yeah, my mom ran the office. I think very much your traditional sort of story. So they were entrepreneurs in their own right. As all dentists are. Yeah,
they really are, aren't they? Because they own their own business. I can't tell you, all my friends that are physicians, my boys even picked up on that. So my boy, we lived in the same place for 32 years, and I would tell these boys, we go to the local restaurant, and then I'd start talking to the manager, and say you were the manager, I'd say, so Ophir, like what is your overhead in this place? I mean, what is your food cost about? Like 30%? And if they start saying, I don't really know, but the ones who say, well, we try to run food cost, we try to keep food costs at about 30, 32, labor under 20. But if they didn't know their number, my boys knew 2-3 years later, they weren't going to be there. And my physician friends that work in hospitals, they don't have a clue of anything. But dentists who own their own building, they are tethered to financial accounting reality. And so you started GumGum, you sold that, and now are you still an owner of GumGum, or is this totally different?
Yes, I'm still the largest individual shareholder of GumGum. We didn't sell it. I started the company, sole founder, ran it for 11 years, grew it considerably, and then earlier this year made the recommendation to the board that we spin out our healthcare division, which is the dental-oriented effort, and that I go along with it, which I think was a surprising decision to a lot of people. But I felt that GumGum had reached a level of maturity and stability and profitability that I could, meaningfully sort of move on to another opportunity to create new value. And I'm super excited, obviously, about what I think we're going to be able to do in this category as we bring these technologies to bear on the industry.
So GumGum is more a media technology.
Really everything that GumGum does is all driven by artificial intelligence and more specifically computer vision. So really we're taking the same technology stack that was applied to things like analyzing television broadcasts to identify sponsorship valuations, for creating brand safe environments on the internet, for placing marketing messages. All these things that we did at GumGum were always driven around computer vision. And as we were more and more successful as a company, we started to apply that technology more widely. And that's why dental was being incubated there.
Is it fair to say, okay, so there's no such thing as artificial intelligence yet. I mean, it hasn't been invented yet, right?
I think, well, it depends on how you define it. So there's something called artificial narrow intelligence. Um, and there's something called ASI, which is artificial superintelligence. So I think these terms get confused very often. Um, so when you say artificial intelligence, people tend to think about, Terminator and killer robots and sort of this Jetsons oriented stuff. But if you look at artificial narrow intelligence, there are a variety of tasks and challenges that computers are far better at than humans. And these are the sorts of tasks that require some level of what you could call reasoning. So if you look at the game Go, or if you look at Jeopardy, or if you look at chess, we've developed effectively artificially intelligent machines, right? They're sort of a poor man's copy of how our own brain functions. And they're able to beat the best players in the world at these games. And, they can't have a conversation with you or make you a cup of coffee, but they're incredibly capable at these very, very narrow tasks. So it really depends on how you define what intelligence is. I would say that they're not conscious, but they are able to learn with data in much the same way that humans do. And they're able to solve problems and complete tasks at superhuman levels within very narrow parameters. So I would say that we've arrived at some level of artificial intelligence, albeit a very narrow one.
Is it as narrow as human intelligence? I mean, even Einstein said two things are infinite: the universe and human stupidity. So when people talk about artificial intelligence, I say, well, it's got to be better than natural intelligence. I mean, natural intelligence is a pretty low bar to get over. But I was just wondering though, but back to GumGum, it sounds like it was more media focused. So out of all the industries in the S&P 500, why dentistry? Why did that pique your interest?
Well, I'm interested in the application of this technology widely, to be fair. So we did actually explore other applications of the technology in the agricultural space, in the security space, and in the healthcare space. My personal goal at this stage of my career is to continue to find the highest possible uses and applications of what is a very powerful and new technology. And I had actually initiated this data collection effort for dental radiographs as far back as almost 3.5 years ago now. So I had an inkling several years back that it would be a good idea to start collecting this data and training on it, never knowing with certainty whether or not that would turn into a business. But as we got to a point at GumGum where we were ready to launch a new division and we were looking at the options available to us, and looking at the dynamics of the dental category and where it was at and how we thought we might slot in, that's ultimately what we decided to pursue. Obviously, I've been exposed to dentistry from a young age. I feel, even though I'm not a dentist, obviously I feel very comfortable in the environment. And I just think that this is a category whereby you have people that are very forward thinking. They're not afraid of technology, and they're also able to make decisions that could impact doctors and practices at a faster velocity than what you typically see in medicine, because there's more authority and ownership over these types of decisions versus, say, selling through to a hospital, which tends to be a totally different kind of effort. So if you're looking at radiology and using AI to read radiographs for any sort of medicine, that's the kind of thing that you're seeing happen in various fields of medicine. And there's varying degrees of success. But there is inherent pushback in a lot of those industries because ultimately you have radiologists, for example, who are fearful of the technology or somehow feel that it's threatening to them. Whereas in dentistry, dentists typically aren't radiologists. That's part of what they do in order to serve patients. And you just don't have the same kind of inherent fear of the technology. At least that was the thinking at the start. And I think so far, that's turned out to be the case. We found a very accepting market and a very excited market and a market that wants help. They want data, they want insights, they want better margins, they want to be able to make better decisions, they want to be able to serve patients. And these are the kind of things that I think we're delivering.
And where do you think it's going to transform dentistry the fastest? Where do you think this beast is going to land first?
Right. It's a good question. So we have a number of products, a number of use cases for the technology. Some subset of those products require FDA approval. So for the patient-facing second opinion capability, where we're reading a radiograph and diagnosing it in partnership with a practitioner, that requires FDA approval. So inherently, even though I think that will probably be the most impactful for the industry, because there's a lot of sort of services and products and capabilities around that one capability that will be very impactful to practices and to DSOs and the like. The reality is that we have applications currently in dental laboratories and with insurance partners, and also sort of helping facilitate decision-making with DSOs that don't require FDA approval, and those are already landing. So I would say that those are going to land first.
And I noticed that when your first GumGum, it was media, you can see when you look at when you go to your website hellopearl.com, second opinion and smart margin, is AI more a visual thing at this point? Is the volume of geometry more data rich than just say accounting numbers, financial accounting?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's different forms of AI. There's different flavors of it. My particular interest is in computer vision, and that goes all the way back to my days at Carnegie Mellon. But there's lots of companies and entities that focus on something called NLP, which is natural language processing, which doesn't look at imagery at all. There's elements of the industry that focus on audio. There's elements of the industry that focus more on sort of predictive analytics versus making sense of some subset of data. So artificial intelligence is really a catch-all term, but within artificial intelligence, you have different subfields. Computer vision is one, machine learning is one expression of how to go about using AI to solve a particular problem, and which is yet another subset. So we focus on the vision side, but lots of other companies focus purely on text.
And so what are you most passionate about now? I mean, how long is so what's taking on now? If you go to Hello Pearl, the future of dentistry powered by AI, and you go to their products, your second opinion, practice intelligence, smart margin. Do you want to go through those three and talk about those three in general, or what would you like to talk about?
Sure. So I think what's interesting about what we're doing is we have a core set of capabilities around imaging and reading imaging and automating tasks. But if you look at how that could be applied to all the constituents in market, whether they're X-ray sensor manufacturers or PMS systems or practitioners or DSOs or dental labs or insurance companies, there's all types of applications for these different constituents, because ultimately what we're doing is we're taking vast quantities of unstructured data and we're structuring that data. And once you structure data, it suddenly becomes something that could be queried and understood at a much deeper level. So if you look at what we're doing in partnership with insurance companies, for example, we're helping them to select and sort of automate parts of the claims process. We're also helping with fraud, waste, and abuse, of which this is a pretty significant issue we found.
With what?
Fraud, waste, and abuse.
Oh, fraud, waste, and abuse. Okay.
Yeah. And for DSOs, one of the things that we're doing that's kind of an interesting application is these DSOs are obviously out there trying to purchase dental offices. And that's a difficult decision, because you could offer a multiple on EBITDA and you might arrive at terms, you might purchase that dental practice. What you don't know is, has there been fraud in this practice? What's the quality of intraoral scans? What does the patient population look like? Has there been overtreatment? and what is individual practitioner performance, all of these things, right? So what we're able to do is help bring technology to bear to answer some of these questions, to shed light on the sort of intricacies of what's going on inside of practices. As it relates to second opinion, I think this is something that you well know and a lot of people in the industry do. There's a lot of inconsistency with how people read x-rays. We've done studies that show that dentists agree with themselves about 70% of the time. They agree with each other a lot less. And bringing a technology that's been trained across tens of millions of radiographs and thousands of practitioners in order to identify every pathology and issue that appears for each patient with a high degree of certainty and confidence helps with liability issues. It helps with treatment planning. And it's just a service that's intended to sort of facilitate the interaction with the patient and take a little bit of load off the dentist's shoulders, which is already, a very significant load that they're always carrying around.
Well,
yep.
it's a big complaint among hygienists. I mean, and they say, okay, if this crown has an opening and he can get like a little stick, then he tells the patient this crown needs to be redone. But if he just did it, if that's his crown, it's all good.
Correct.
And and then a lot of them are in very abusive situations where they ask the dentist about that. They'll say, well, what is about that? And they snap and say, well, you should go to dental school. And when hygienists ask me that question, I just say, quit. You're not gonna change some toxic weirdo. I mean, he should be a mentor to you. He should be growing you, not making you feel bad. The dentistry is not a standard product. I mean, you could, whenever it's been done, I mean, it started off with a long time ago, it was Reader's Digest, had a great guy, and he took an FMX and he went around to 30 houses, and they had a cover story that is your dentist ripping out, because they went to 30 different dentists and got 30 different treatment plans. So how is dentistry a standard product? It's just not.
No, and I think that's to its own detriment. And I think the more sunlight that you can shine onto this category and really any other category, the better off that category is going to be in the long run. For example, one of the things that we've noticed in working with large sets of practices is that, and you know this well, I'm sure, is that, experience matters a lot. And if you're looking at reading radiographs, somebody who's a year out of college is going to be generally doing a worse job than someone with 20 years experience. And that, we think, is a solvable problem, partially with this technology. We are working with a handful of leading universities on creating a set of learning tools so that within the student environment, they're able to leverage our technology to sort of test the efficacy of their reading of radiographs and do that at their own pace. And we hope to be producing dentists that on day one are just more capable and more experienced.
So how long before the computer just reads it and just tells you the answer?
So that happens now, but this is intended to. There's two things to say about that. One is that there's still a level of probability associated with all forms of computer vision and AI. Just there's a level of probability with having a human read something. So we ultimately want to defer to the dentist after giving them the results so they can make sort of the final decision. And also you need to make decisions about treatment planning and how to go about actually solving the problems and issues that are identified. So it's not that the machine can't read the radiograph better than a human today. In many cases, we're very much already there. But ultimately, this is just one piece of the puzzle, right? The patient still needs to be communicated to and treated. And that is obviously the dentist's job. The dentist's job, in our view, is to be able to explain, to be compassionate, and to obviously treat a set of pathologies. One thing that we're really excited about is we're working to standardize treatment plans across the board. So what you currently will find is for a given set of pathologies, different dentists will just want to treat all this stuff in different ways. And ultimately, there is an optimal way to treat a set of pathologies and issues. And there might be some things that are cosmetic and some things that are disease oriented. And you need to sort of prioritize these things and make those choices available to a patient. And I think that this technology will help do that at scale, and that's ultimately better for everyone involved as well.
You know, you've lived, obviously. I mean, you went to Carnegie Mellon. You went to just. Did you actually go to Pennsylvania? Because I know they got a school out there in L.A.
Yeah. I think when I was there, they didn't have that school, but I was in Pittsburgh. Yes.
So you went to Pittsburgh. So did you come back a Steelers fan, or did you stay with your rate? What are you in Los Angeles? Your teams are coming and going.
I'm still a Steelers fan, actually. They kind of won me over because we had lost the Raiders for some period when they went up to Oakland. I'm a fan, like you can't help but get very much into sports when you're in Pittsburgh. It's very much a sports town. So I like the Penguins. I like the Steelers. I like the Pirates. I'm still, I would say, a Lakers and Dodgers fan first.
A Lakers and Dodgers fan?
Yeah.
First. And when you went to Carnegie,
I grew up in LA.
And when you went to Carnegie Mellon, were you more of an Andrew Carnegie fan of the Scottish American industrialist, or were you more of an Andrew Mellon fan, banking, businessman?
I was more of a Herbert Simon, Alan Newell fan, which are two really renowned professors that had that were professors at CMU, and these are two of the fathers of modern day artificial intelligence. So back in 1956, there was a meeting of the minds of some of the top computer scientists and mathematicians in the country at Dartmouth. Alan and Herb were two of those folks that joined. I think it was 6 in total.
Herbert Simon and Alan who?
Newell, Newell, and that's actually where the term artificial intelligence was coined, way back in the late 50s. And really, the first neural network that was designed was in the very early 1960s. So people tend to think of this stuff as being fairly recent, but really the mathematical underpinnings and the theory behind what's driving all of the revolution that we're seeing in AI today was invented back in the 60s. We just didn't have the computing power to run these algorithms at scale. And it was with the advent of GPUs, because of gaming, which happened to be serendipitous, that suddenly we were able to perform these vast quantities of calculations quickly enough that you can train up systems and run them in production environments. So Carnegie Mellon is a very intimate role in what has become modern AI. And, there's been various false starts with AI since the 60s. There was a lot of excitement at that point. There was a lot of excitement again in the 80s, primarily on the part of Japan. And that led to what effectively became what's known as the second AI winter. And now we're in what people are referring to as an AI spring. And things really are different this time because we're solving hard problems every single day across every single industry using this technology. And we have the computing speed and we have the big data resources available, such that even if this technology were to stop being developed today, we still already have a powerful tool in sort of the tool chest to solve a specific type of problem.
So I got my first Xerox machine. I graduated in 87 and bought it in 89 just because young, dumb kid, loved technology. It was a toy. It was a boy and his toy. Yeah. But I remember whenever I would go back to Austria or Germany and you talk to the Sirona people about all your issues, they'd always say, well, there's a million things we'd want to do, but we have to cut it back because there wasn't enough processing, the Intel mic. So the whole problem with all that technology was waiting for Intel's microprocessors. Is that when you say GPU, does that include an Intel inside?
Yeah, Intel has a whole line of, absolutely. And NVIDIA is a big player in the space as well. So effectively, What you're doing when you're training a neural network is you're doing hundreds of millions or many more very relatively simple calculations, but in massive, massive quantities. CPUs are not really tuned for that. They're tuned more so for multitasking. GPUs were developed so much because the gaming industry is such a force in the market and produces so much revenue that there's a lot of competition and incentive on the part of chip makers to be able to render very complex 3D environments very quickly. And it turns out that that same processing, which is basically doing lots of simple calculations, could be applied to what we need for a neural network to function. And that's what's effectively made neural networks, feasible to use.
So you're saying that. So you're saying then that there actually was a purpose for these people that play Fortnite.
That's right.
They actually led us to, there was a reason
identifying widened periodontal ligaments.
I never knew anyone found a purpose for these Fortnite players, but you just did. But the one thing I'm excited about the most is the fact that I've been in this space a long time, and when you say artificial intelligence, I said natural intelligence limited. None of these dentists know their numbers, and that was okay when everybody was like a cottage industry and your mom and dad ran it at an office and all that stuff like that. But now you have these highly debt leveraged DSOs that have borrowed a ton of money. And some of them it's public record that their debt is rated as junk, and in the next financial contraction, every financial contraction always, thins the herd. And I think a lot of over leveraged DSOs and a lot of people, whenever you say DSO, they always think of someone that owns 100 to 1,000 offices. Most DSOs are in the 3 to 10 office deal. And I'm still shocked that when I podcasted 100 of them, they never know their numbers. I mean, and then you go in their office and they don't know their numbers. And so you have all these employees working in these highly leveraged offices, and no one even really knows their break-even point. The hygienist. I know you have the second opinion. I know you have the smart margin for Crown and Bridge.
Well, we also have,
but you got that practice intelligent, which is why I've been stalking you for so long.
Right. I think that might be the most impactful product offering that we have on the docket, and the reason for that is exactly because of the things that you're talking about. Ultimately, if you don't know your numbers, if you're not sort of on top of the types of tasks that are repetitive but very important and improving those consistently over time, then you're sort of behind the ball. So what we're able to do with practice intelligence is we're able to look at entire patient populations cut up in any which way by geography or age or gender or whatever makes sense. And we're able to list, for example, what are the open pathologies that exist. We're able to look back in time and understand sort of in a perennial fashion the level of degradation with something like bone loss. We're able to understand whether or not historical treatments have been effective. We're able to understand performance at the practitioner level. We're able to look at all the intraoral scans that have ever been taken into practice and identify who's not doing a good job prepping teeth and who's not taking high quality scans. And that's really problematic, especially when you look. So we see millions and millions of intraoral scans, and you'd be shocked. I would probably put the number at 75% or 80% of poor quality scans. Either the scan quality is low or the preps quality is low. And that inevitably, by definition, leads to very low quality restorations. So we have to jam a bunch of cement and make it work because nobody wants to get the patient back in the chair. And this is an entirely solvable problem. It's not something we need to be afraid of or ashamed of. We can get better at this by just shining light on it and improving. And this is entirely within reach.
But is any of that going to be financial? I mean, everything you're talking about seems like visuals, intraoral pictures, x-rays, preps, things like that. But any of that hook up to QuickBooks Pro or accounting?
Well, one thing that's interesting, I mean, you could almost think of the current capabilities as a lead gen tool, both historical and ongoing in a real-time basis. So if you give me any set of x-rays, whether they be 10 or 10 million, I could look at those sets of x-rays and tell you what every single untreated pathology and issue is. Open margins, bone loss, different forms of caries. And suddenly that in itself, I think would have an impact, because what we sort of envision doing is notifying practitioners on an ongoing basis about what they're missing and what's untreated within their patient population. I don't think that that's well tracked or well understood, and oftentimes these things go totally unnoticed. We're not necessarily tying directly back into accounting software, but we are ultimately giving practitioners better tools to identify untreated issues so that they can reach out to patients, and do so being sort of backed by a technology that I think they could stand behind, that patients could also get behind, so that they can treat them more completely and more effectively. So that's one thing. If you're talking about a DSO, whether it's 10 or 100 practices, you still do want to understand the performance of your practitioners so that you can deploy the appropriate training. That will lead to, I think, lower patient attrition ultimately, and it'll lead to better dentists, so therefore better reputation, and that ultimately leads to, longer term financial success as well.
I mean, some of these DSOs, I mean, I was talking to, and again, when I'm talking about a DSO, it's, it's usually some guy in a town of,
Sure.
I don't know, 60,000, and he had one practice, but he decided that if he had a north, south, east, west practice, he could have it'd be a scale, one level of management. And what that means is go back to the E-Myth. I mean, your office manager is not an office manager. I mean, I've been in your office a million times. She's answering the phone. She's checking in patients. There's nothing office managerial about her work. Franchises work because they have a separate location where they're not making hamburgers, fries, and Cokes, and they're just working on the business. Right. And so these DSOs get into things like they first find out that something's wrong with their doctor because they got served a lawsuit. So then they start focusing on that, and they start digging up. And the first thing they find out is that this office has 4 dental assistants, and none of them would let that dentist work on them or any of their patients.
Exactly.
And it's like, so quality control, if you got nothing to lose, there's no big deal. But as these DSOs get bigger and bigger, they have more assets that are threatened.
Yeah. And with the smaller DSOs, you typically have a practicing dentist who has to run their own, home office, and then they have 4 additional locations. They don't have the time to do it well or effectively. And we think technology could be deployed so that there is sort of this layer of security that's sitting there and notifying them of any potential or recurring issues, right? And I think that is important and helpful. Because right now, how do you get insight into anything if you're talking to a DSO? You call, Dan at the front desk, and you say, hey, how many patients do you think have, bone loss? And they'll give you some guesstimate. I mean, there's no structured data, therefore nothing is queryable. Therefore, a lot of things are just not knowable in a way where you can systematically deploy better processes and better solutions. That's fundamental to every category of dentistry. And once we're able to deploy that in a way where it's really user-friendly, really easy to interface with, you kind of have this buddy. I kind of think about it. Remember that paperclip in Microsoft Office that everyone hated? I kind of see it as the version of that is actually great and helpful, where it's kind of like you have this pal there looking over your shoulder, giving you insight and helping you better manage your business.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they got so upset about that paperclip, is because deep down inside they just hated Microsoft. I mean, I lived through that. I couldn't believe it because it's so unfair. Because like my dental offices, I just had celebrating my 32-year anniversary, right? Last Saturday. The city engineers, they built 48th Street in Ray, which someone's died at like every month since I've been there. Hell, my dental office killed one person 3 months in a row. They closed me down. But when Arizona Department of Transportation decides they're going to build an 8-lane intersection in this little, I mean, so many of Microsoft, I mean, they would just intentionally know that they released all their software filled with bugs.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm a dentist trying to do a root canal, and I just gave Bill Gates all this money. I bought this software, and every single IT guy that comes out here just says, we'll never buy the first release. It's all filled with bugs, blah, blah. And it's like, well, why would you just release a bunch of crap when you know it? I'm a dentist and I know you're selling crap. Why don't you know you're selling crap? But back to this AI. Do you think that dentistry, it's getting exposed to the word telemedicine? You're a telemedicine play. I mean, this is technology, computers, scanners, telemedicine. But I noticed SD Smiles Direct Club just went public last month, and they're a tele-dentistry play. Is that word getting, is it going to be an emotionally bad word? I mean, is it going to be a trigger word where if you walk into a dental conference and say teledentistry, someone's going to have angina and the other guy will get upset?
I think people are somewhat threatened by that term. I actually don't think about us necessarily as being teledentistry, because we still are servicing practitioners that are in a live environment with patients for the most part. I think the IPO markets generally recently have been troubling. I mean, you have everything from Peloton to Smile Direct Club, obviously Uber and Lyft. And what's interesting to note there is while they have had very disappointing IPOs, I think Smile Direct is at half the value that they IPO'd at today. They're still far more valuable than they were in the private markets, just as sort of a helpful data point. But I do think that new is always threatening, and we're going to be seeing a lot of new. I mean, we've been getting contacted by a lot of entities in the US that are opening up these dental bars. So kind of salon-like environments where you can walk in and get teeth cleaning, you can get some hygiene done, you can get some x-rays taken. It's a really nice experience. You don't necessarily have to have an appointment. It's not a medical environment. I think that could potentially be very disruptive to the industry. You see some big box stores focusing on opening up dental clinics. I mean, I think we're in the age of disruption, and that's going to continue to happen. It's going to happen because consumer expectations are changing, and it's going to happen because the rate of technological change is dramatic. So the reason it's hard to predict the future, and the reason it feels like things are changing so rapidly, is because a lot of the technologies that are underpinning a lot of these developments are exponential in terms of their growth. So if you look at wireless speeds or obviously microprocessing speeds or pixel resolutions or all these different things, these are technological movements that are growing exponentially. And once an exponential curve inflects, and you get that doubling on very large numbers, then things start to change very, very rapidly, and things that were not possible in the very recent history suddenly become possible. And that's the world that we live in. I think the dental category is seeing it, but I also think every other category is seeing it. And business is ultimately inherently competitive. It's a warlike place at the end of the day. And I think that the practitioners that focus on servicing patients and that take advantage of technologies that will be able to serve them and their needs are going to ultimately continue to be successful. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things out there that represent some level of existential threat. And I think that if I was a practitioner, I'd be a little nervous as well, because there's very disruptive technologies. I mean, in the case of Smile Direct, you had an aligner market that was very well defined, and now it's less well defined for a variety of reasons. There's a lot more players in it, and that's threatening and problematic if that's your core business.
When you look out in the horizon, from where you sit, who do you think are the major disruptors today?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, we know that it's, what I've been struck by in this category is that There's a handful of large companies that are in control of a lot of important components of the value chain. These companies
In
are
dentistry.
typically in dentistry.
Okay.
Pretty well capitalized. And in interfacing with them and talking about partnership opportunities and other opportunities, they're very smart. They're very aggressive. They're very competitive. In some cases, they're very acquisitive. So I've actually been impressed by just the level of business sort of savvy that I've seen in the category. You have a lot of the large players like Danaher's, Cavo, which is now Invista, which I think is a very capable group. Obviously, you have Shine, which is a very well-run operation. You have Glidewell, which is forward-thinking technologically. You have Dentsply, that's doing some impressive things. So you have these large, very entrenched players that I think are going to continue to be forces to be reckoned with. But you also have entirely new models that stand to potentially disrupt things. We talked about these dental bars. We know that sort of Walmart is out there and could be very disruptive. And there's a whole slew of startups that are working on new technologies, whether they be new forms of materials from a chemistry perspective, or things like AI that stand to really transform things. I do believe, and obviously I'm biased, but I do strongly believe that the things that we are doing are going to be are going to impact the industry more than the industry has been impacted in a very, very long time, because we're able to add such a significant amount of efficiency into these business processes, whether it be insurance claims or margin marking or practice intelligence, that I think is going to be a real game changer. But I also think that the industry will be better for it.
You've mentioned dental bars twice. What's getting your mind share? When you say dental bars, who are you thinking of? You're thinking of someone specifically.
There's a company called Tend, for example.
Tend?
Tend. I think their website's Hello Tend. I think that's one of the guy who was CEO of Smile Direct Club for a minute is the CEO of this company. They've raised money from One Medical, who obviously has a certain model that they're looking to potentially replicate. And they're a very capable group. And I think it makes sense. So if you suddenly have cleanings happening in more salon-like environments and teeth whitening, then that is taking away a very important mechanism to get a patient into the dental office and then to do work there. So I'm not.
You said that guy was
these guys, but I could see him being disruptive.
You said that guy was from Smile. Where would you say?
I believe he was a Smile. I think he was a CEO of Smile Direct. For a guy named Doug Hudson. Is that showing up for you?
From Smiles Direct Club?
Yeah.
So is any when you look at major disruptors, do you think any DSO has got a higher interest and attraction to AI than others?
I think there's a lot of talk. I think if you ask a large DSO, take your pick of the bunch, whether they're working on AI or they're going to say yes, and we're working on it and we have resources dedicated to it. We haven't seen a lot of activity directly coming out of the DSOs as it relates to that technology. Do I think they're a disruptive, powerful, and meaningful force? It's hard to look at the numbers and the trend lines and deny that they are. I mean, they're largely overtaking dentistry in the United States. I mean, it's a massive, increasingly a massive component of the market, and the growth rate is large. And you have these PE firms that have glommed on to this in a way that is clearly exciting enough to them to continue to invest heavily. So I think that DSOs, for better or for worse, are very much a part of the fabric of what dentistry looks like today and is going to look like into the future.
Okay.
What do you think?
Well, I always have to ask people, how old were you in 1980?
-2.
Okay. So that was, I was born in 62. So that was my rock bottom experience. I mean, interest rates were 21%, double digit unemployment, inflation. Everyone knew who the Federal Reserve Chairman was, Paul Volcker, because he lived under an armed security guard. So right now, right now it's kind of hysterical because it's laughing because people are complaining about the Fed. Well, he's not being carried around by military people in armed cars. But anyway, it was really bad, and we all lived through it. And then I graduated May 11, 87, and it took me...
May what?
What's that?
May what?
May 11, 1987.
Oh, May 11. I was May 3rd, 82.
What was... When what? When you were born? Okay.
Yeah.
And then there was Black Monday. And then, then the Y2K fall, and then there was Lehman's Day, and I just, so it seems to me that everyone always thinks linearly. Like if this DSO went from one location to 100, and then the same amount of time went to 200 to 300, they just think they can linearly add it all up and tell you where they're going to be. It doesn't work that way. What goes up comes down. They're highly leveraged. They're either and in the down contraction, that's how evolution works. The business models that aren't working need cleaned up, and it's a good thing because then those workers can all be dedeployed to a better business model. So I'm really interested in the next business. Who will serve? What business models will survive the next contraction? And that's going to be very interesting. And I
think that's very interesting and very much an open question. And the extent to how healthy or unhealthy these businesses are is something that I think once we have a financial contraction, that's going to come to light very quickly. And I think some DSOs are better run than others, and that's the reality too.
Right. That'll always be. I mean, there's just better operators. And a lot of times, I mean, in my lifetime, there's only been a handful of companies that just blew up, 30,000% or more. And one of them was Walmart. And I've still never met anyone who knows who the CEO of Walmart is, because Hollywood has got you thinking that he's some hot, sexy guy with good hair like you, driving a Ferrari or something with all the chicks. And no, man, he was just a boring old guy with his head down, and he was an operator. He was a numbers guy, and Walmart was an amazing deal. So, gosh, I'm just trying to think. Any other we're almost at an hour. Any other technological disruptors that got your attention or respect?
We haven't seen, and it's not because I don't think it's coming, but we haven't seen a huge amount of direct competition. There are certainly some players out there who are dabbling, not particularly well capitalized yet, but I think there's a huge amount of opportunity here. So first off, even from a radiographical perspective, there's CBCT. I believe a company out of Israel is working on that as well. There's Panos and Ceph and just imaging problems that are very straightforward. There's all types of automation that can happen on the dental laboratory side. And there's all types of processes that could be optimized throughout the entire value chain. So, I think we're sort of at a point right before where there's going to be a major inflection, and this technology will start to have a real impact, and there'll be an influx of additional players. But I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen a huge amount of startups that I think are quite there yet, but I think they're on their way.
And do you think there'll be more in technology, supplies, or the actual delivering of the dental care?
No, I think the supply game is going to continue to be sort of Amazon and Shine kind of going at it.
But when do you think that happens? I mean, Greater New York, meaning 3 years in a row, there's Amazon, and the boys behind the booth are dressed like Men in Black, and they're just there like three. This will be year 4. But I don't. Is there? I don't know of really anybody. Any major company.
I think Amazon is hugely capable, obviously, but also just distracted. I think they have a lot of opportunities that they're going after, and I think they were they go in and out of being focused on the dental category, but I think they have a plan that they're exacting. And it's hard to argue that they're not going to be a meaningful player in that space simply because they have such a uniquely powerful infrastructure for delivery. And that ultimately is a massive asset that's almost impossible to replicate. Um, so so there's that. I do think sort of one thing that we're going to see that we'd like to be involved in as well are these connections between systemic health and oral health. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there that would be hugely insightful and helpful to patients if we were able to make those connections, although it requires, sort of creating a bridge between electronic health records and dental records. And once you can do that at enough scale and you have the data, it'll be fairly easy to spot the correlations. And I think that there's a lot of correlations to be had there. I think China, uniquely in this particular space because of their particular form of government, is going to get there potentially ahead of a lot of other players just because they have access to data on a massive population of people over a long period of time. And it's more easily accessed and more easily mined.
All right. Is there any other things that you wanted to talk about today? Can't believe.
No, I think, yeah.
My God, it's just so fun to listen to your minds. I mean, this week, I've done a gazillion, million, trillion fillings, and it's fun to come out of an operatory and listen to you guys talk about all things technology. There is, I'm sure there's, if people are watching this on iTunes, they probably don't know, but if anybody's watching this on YouTube, probably the most pressing question is, who has better hair, you or Stanley?
I was going to say you.
Did you have to have a lot of good hair to join?
On this one.
It sounds like to join your company, you had to have a dad that's a dentist and good hair. Right. So, so when did you and Stanley meet? Was this high school, college?
No, I was a patient at his office. So I literally went there one day a few years ago, and Dr. Helm, who's one of his partners, is my dentist. And I said to them, like, guys, I've been thinking a lot about applying this technology to healthcare. I think I really want to explore, particularly in the dental category. Are you interested in this? Could you share some data with me so that we can sort of test some things out? And Dr. Stanley kind of overheard the conversation, and he came up to me afterwards and we got to talking, and he was very, very interested and engaging on this topic and very helpful in helping us get some initial data sets. And it was all very serendipitous, honestly. He's been a tremendous asset. He's obviously a very capable practitioner. He's got those good looks, which is always nice. And, given what we do, we need a practitioner in-house day to day to guide the things that we're doing to make sure that we're on the right track. And he's been a great asset, but it was all very serendipitous the way that it came together. And the timing worked out where he was willing to devote more time to Pearl. I was eventually willing to leave this much larger other company that I had started to pursue this exclusively. So we'll see where it goes, but we're having a lot of fun. We're really excited about just helping shed light on various elements of the market. We love dentists at the end of the day. Obviously, our fathers are dentists. We do feel that we're operating not in the service of any particular constituent. We kind of want to remain independent in that regard and just be providers of truth. But we do think that this is an industry that could be, it could gain more in the way of popular and public support, and it deserves to gain more, and that'll make for a bigger opportunity overall. And I think we could also be helpful in sort of in that effort. So we're having a blast.
Well, it was an honor to have you come on. I just want to finish the show with you went to CMU, Carnegie Mellon University, one of the greatest universities ever. And I'm a big Andrew Carnegie fan. I'm a big fan of people.
Same. I never answered that question. I'm more of a Carnegie.
They just, I mean, they're just, and so many people, I get so upset when people sit there and say something they didn't like about him. I'm like, well, what the hell was your great grandfather doing back then? You know, drinking moonshine out of his bathtub, and you're upset. You know, so your great grandfather isn't even on the map. So it's easy to be a critic, but it's amazing. I love some of his quotes. As I grow older, I pay less attention to what men say. I just watch what they do. We all know actions speak louder than words. You cannot push anyone up a ladder unless he's willing to climb it himself. I mean, these guys, they were simple people with a work ethic that wouldn't stop, yet they were also fearless, and they just would walk into the unknown and do this stuff. But it was an honor and a privilege to have you. And tell your dad that he did a great job raising you. You're going to give credit to your dad or your mom on that one?
You know, I always like to say I think my dad was actually a fantastic dentist, especially on the cosmetic stuff. He's super artistic and capable. But I think if my mom wasn't running that office, we might have ended up on the street. So I give them both credit.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about all things dental AI.
I'm a big fan, and also keep up the great work. You're helping us all in the industry learn more every day.